Hi all and welcome to a special show tonight, Truth, Honour and Integrity special show, and it's one we've been waiting for since August. I know one or two of the members have listened to the previous episode with Miss Manna, and I think they're up to 55 listens, so that particular person, Robert, will be delighted that she's on again tonight. So tonight, after the historic announcement a couple of weeks ago with regards to the Manna World Trust declaring America a sovereign entity, we're going to get the background details of what has taken place, the who, what, when, where and why, and go into more deeper details of what's the Manna World Holding Trust, a little bit of politics and the way forward and how things can be and will be implemented, and a whole heap more. Hi, Kim.
Good evening, Thomas.
So it's been a long journey, but we've still got a long way to go. But we've made giant strides over the past 12 months, and we're now starting to see little bits of fruition before we get into what is the background of the Manna World Trust. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Things
you want me to start going over the background?
Yeah, things are moving forward though fairly quickly now. There's lots going on. There's lots going on everywhere. People threatening and people trashing and people doing this and people doing that, and there's a lot of panic going on, and we'll cover some of that later. But first of all, I'd like to go into the background of what is the Manna World Holding Trust, who held it at various times, and what was the fund's purpose, and how did it all come about?
Well, you've clearly explained on a couple of shows that you've done in the past about the structure of what I call the order. Yeah. You had the sons and a father at the top, and then you had the parents, and then you had the covens.
Yes.
And then you had the coven members, and then you had the groups that reported directly to them. And then at the bottom here of the structure, you had the dragon family. Now, the dragon families are not all Chinese, as you know.
Yeah.
They go by varying names. You had, we call them the 13 families of the Illuminati. You had 5 Asian families. You had the Rothschilds. And then each group had its respective subgroups that did work directly for them. So you had the AAIA, now known as the AAA or the Nazi group. You had a number of different groups which were all subservient to them. And the trust had many names before. The predominant asset base of the trust is not only in-ground assets, but also assets that had been mined in the past, and then, of course, currencies that were based on those assets. So this has been a long process. It's not been a short process. The trust had been in existence and for thousands of years. It is not something that's new, and it didn't start with Marcos or Alpha Omega or the Trilaterals or any of these people. It started long before these groups ever came about.
Yes.
In 2012, a lot of those agreements started expiring. There was an extension of 5 years given on some of the assets and to some of the groups to complete their quote-unquote task, which was dictated always by the dictator at the top. Under martial law, everything runs on a military structure. So I don't mean a government martial law, I mean a global martial law, which was always the plan, whereby eventually the council, divine, quote-unquote, divine council of 13 would take over. They were unsuccessful in concluding their plan, and therefore the trust was then turned back over to the people. And the people were supposed to, the parties that were in charge of the trust at the time were supposed to actually start dispersing the assets back to the nations where they were pilfered from in 2012. They obviously did not conclude this task. That was when my position became firm, and then I became trustee. Upon the death of the majority of the people in the top groups, we're talking about parent level, current coven level,
Yeah.
and the two sons passed away, the father is gone, and so that left me there on that level to communicate with their groups that were underneath them, and then I guess supposedly the dragons were supposed to help, but they're actually still doing the opposite. So rather than try to have continuous conversations with these dragon families, I just stopped and then started communicating directly with the people and the government.
So
the trust was consolidated.
Yeah.
I just wanted to finish up. The trust was consolidated into one large trust. All of the former trustees, families, everybody, all the names were removed. And now it's just under the name of Manna World Holding Trust, all 165 accounts and various asset bases.
Well, I bet that didn't please some.
Well, I don't think so.
No. Well, you know, it's been, as you said, it's been going for thousands of years, and they've not really done anything for the benefits of the people. It's just about them collecting resources and land and acquiring all kinds of things for the benefit of them, and not for who really created the wealth in the trust, as I understood it, which is the people. You know, it's the people's labour that creates the wealth, and they've conveniently forgotten that. Or deliberately forgotten it, and it's now time. So now you are in position with the Manna World Holding Trust. What is the trust purpose now, and how do you see your role in it going forward?
Well, after most of the groups at the top were gone, I had the opportunity to learn the system. So it is one of the world's oldest AI systems in existence. The system itself was repurposed. Now, it actually is a lot more than just a financial system.
Yep.
However, most of those functions have been disabled. It is now a trinary system, not a binary system anymore. And the only function that we're still using on it is actually the financial system. So that's a good thing for humanity.
Yeah.
The trust purpose, since all the assets were repurposed, the in-ground assets that were leveraged are to be returned to the countries of origin in a manner which is equal government to people. So the leverage against those assets of currencies is supposed to be returned to the people, where the government gets a part of it and then the people get a part of it for projects, for production, for stabilization, and then once all that is completed, as far as I'm concerned, my job is, in that aspect of my job, because I wear about 7 hats now. So that aspect of my job is completed, and I don't have to do that part of my job, which will be a very good day for me.
Yeah.
Because these dragons, Etal, and all their minions only understand money and power. They don't understand all the rest of the job, which is the most important part.
Yeah. This is it's like these people. Some of them are complete psychopaths, and you know, having been in their field as such, the levels of evil. I don't think most people can comprehend what we, and you in particular, have been dealing with. You know, and it's all right for internet warriors to sit there and criticise, but there's a whole different world out there that people don't realise, and they're only touching and scratching the surface, mainly. And you know, it's difficult, as you know. Has it been more difficult than you thought it would be, or? has it?
Oh, absolutely. I thought, you know, when I was appointed, I was in a foreign country, and at the time the U.S. markets were crashing, and this is the end of 2010, sorry, and I was basically trying to transfer gold to the U.S. Treasury. Now, I was just making arrangements, and then I was notified I had this position. So I was a little bit in shock, but I thought, well, gee, this is so great. I can do all these humanitarian things around the world. Little did I know the very steep learning curve that came next. You know, it's a lot more difficult than I ever thought it was. The whole other side of the world that nobody even knows exists, you know, started slowly creeping up. I had a major learning experience in some meetings in 2015. I had no idea this is what the main controller people looked like, so I was pretty much in shock at that, and you know, and then started meeting a lot of the others, and you know, just coming to realize that they're just like us, right? They just looked different, maybe had a little more technology at the time that they were overthrown by the other group. Yeah. But, you know, I've met a lot of good people too, you know, and a lot of crazy people too.
Yeah. I'm wondering, has the shape of your head changed, given you've had to bang your head against the wall more than once?
It's a lot flatter now that you mention. You know, I have a lot more wrinkles. I haven't pulled all my hair out yet, but there are days where I want to. But no, it's actually been I've met a lot of really good people that, you know, right when I'm at the point of thinking my head's going to be totally flat, I meet the next person who makes me realize why I'm still doing this.
Yeah, you know, I'm aware about how difficult it is, and I've tried to relay that, but until you're in it and involved in it, people really have no idea. And the easiest thing is, because it is frustrating, everyone doubts you, because everyone's, they want to be the one. But then if they wanted to be the one, they should have done it. You know, we've had a load of people who've come forward. They're going to do this and fix this and OPPT and Swiss and no and all the other stuff. But, you know, you went ahead and did it. And that's the difference. You know, we've all waited 2 weeks and imminent and soon, and we all got tired of that. And, you know, it's kudos to yourself and the team that you kept going, because there are times when it does get frustrating. I feel that myself, when you think, I don't know why I'm doing this. You know, why are we waking people up who can't comprehend the basic stuff and act and think in the right way? You know, so you have to have a lot of patience and a lot of endurance involved in these type of things, and I imagine, like myself, you surprised yourself that you've kept going and kept going and kept going.
I still cannot believe that I'm still here.
Yeah.
You know, despite many claims and 42 Jesuses and 2 Mother Marys and 1 Satan, a couple Josephs, many chosen ones. You know, but it always ends with the same thing. We would like the codes to the system. Oh, okay, well, if you're chosen or whomever, and it's meant to be, then you should have them. Nobody should have to talk to me, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd rather give 1 million codes to 1 million people than give them 1.
Yeah. Absolutely. So the Chinese elders, there's been much fun and games with Chinese elders and dragons in the background, and it's my understanding that they were part of the trust at one point. And apart from the now obvious failed program called the RV, you know, I don't recall, I remember asking you this a while back, but I don't recall that the Chinese elders or dragons have ever given anything to America or any other non-aligned country either. Is that the case?
Well, remember, there was always a controller at the top.
Yeah.
And this goes long before the day, in 1978 is when the electronic financial system was added to the AI system. So even long before the days of codes, even long before, they've had access to assets. They did not own the assets. They were trustees, and the ultimate controller always had control. That had not changed until in 2016.
Yeah.
So it hasn't, they have not, however, been receiving codes to transfer funds since 2007 for some groups, and 2012 for others. I think the last one was about 2013, and they haven't received any access to any off-ledger, or you call them heritage funds or anything, and they know it too. Just so you know, they absolutely know every single one of these groups. Rothschild knows it, the Chinese elders know it, all the 5 families over there, the British families know it, the ones from France know it. Everybody knows they do not have any access to release the funds for any of the contracts they're putting together right now. And they're just playing the game.
Yeah, and the 5 Star Trust and another group, and obviously Anne and her people still playing games. And of course the Pindars, of which there's been 2 or 3 recently, also failed with their codes, did they not?
Well, they were, I don't know if they were waiting for codes or, again, the previous party, back in 2015, was given a key card. It's a different kind of key card. And he was told that card would work. And then when it didn't work, they told him to just sit down and wait. And that it would work sometime soon. And so a year goes by and it still doesn't work, and he finally figured it out that they had been lying to him, and he backed off. And then they appointed a new Pindar who was running around with all these funny-looking things, trying to go from vault to vault to vault to vault. And then the same thing with the next one that was appointed this past October. They did the same thing. They don't understand why it's not working. The vaults are empty. Those assets have been moved anyway. So, but the key, it's all electronically controlled, and it's all under the control of the AI system. The AI system is much more than just a computer. People don't understand the extent of the system. So absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, anybody goes near any one of these places, there's an alert that goes out.
So these are the types of alerts that keeps you up most of the night before an alleged RV is to take place at Tuesday 8 a.m. in the morning, and if not Wednesday 8 a.m. in the morning, they start hacking, as I understand it.
Yep, that's pretty much what happens every time. It's always some new system, be it black screens or UN systems or silica-based systems or Asian systems. But yeah, it's always just somebody trying to get into a computer, and it's usually these by the orders of some dragon or another, or one of their respective underlying groups.
Yeah. So the fact that they have to hack into the World Trust should tell most people with common sense that they don't have the assets to carry off the RV. And I believe you've been doing a lot of work with the RV people, because they've been lied to also, and they've also been used like mugs, like the dinar, with the dinars and all the other stuff that's gone on before. And we've had some success with the RV people. They've finally seen through the lies, as I understand it.
some have and some haven't. Some days I wish I had an old Chinese man costume. But I think, all in all, most of the people understand that, we've done things like, for example, there's these Cottrells and the Wantas and the M1s of the plural and the Philippine people and the Marcos, the son of the grandson and whatnot that are running around all telling the story, right? Well, so I issued into some of these RV chat rooms a code challenge. So I said, I'll issue codes, you issue codes. We'll both walk up to the terminal together. Whichever one can transfer $10 wins. Yeah. And every single one of them that came forward yelling and screaming, and they all said, well, we're waiting for the Chinese elders to give us codes. I didn't have one person at all that wasn't waiting for a code from a Chinese elder. Yeah. Well, the Chinese elders are waiting for theirs too. Yeah. So, and then it all comes back to, calling me.
Yeah.
Or hacking, or trying to upload the old system into the new system that they create, which looks like a 6-month-old infant in comparison to the wisdom of a 100-year-old man.
Yeah.
It's so far superior to anything that is being created. They don't really even understand it. Of course, because they never controlled it.
No, they didn't. And this is part of the problem of that's gone on in all levels of the compartmentalization of everything. And suddenly, when the top people left and departed, they didn't pass on the knowledge to the lower levels, and the lower levels suddenly think that they can, the top ones are gone, and we're going to run it for the world, and we're going to take over, except they don't have the knowledge or the intelligence to do it. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, the controller was always in control.
Yeah.
And although he gave them all glorious titles and had them working for him basically exclusively, they used to say that they were nothing more than slave masters. Yeah. Herding and collecting assets on behalf of the king, right? And then the soon-to-be next person in line, which was his son. So, they have a level of self-importance ingrained into their mind that makes them think, and they can't get around the fact that they lied to them. Now, I had been sitting there in meetings with these people before, and they used to laugh at which one could tell the most amount of lies and have the most amount of people believe it. And these dragons are people. Maybe they have ingrained DNA of some sort or another to another group. That's, if I can't touch it or see it myself, I don't believe it anymore. So is that the case? I don't know. I really don't.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're still on the trust. There was a mention in the letter, which we're going to get into shortly, about pledges to the trust. What does that entail? How does that come about?
Okay, define pledges. I don't have the...
where are we? Let me just pull that up. It was mentioned about certain pledges that were beholden to the trust. Assets that were pledged, if memory serves me correctly.
Yes. Okay. When you made your way all the way down the food chain to the asset collection group, which are your dragon families. Yeah. The dragon families were required to adhere to what we call the level 6 procedure. It went all the way up to like level 13, 14. In a level 6 procedure, they had to put something in to get something out. So even though they were doing very large leverages, they'd do 100 to 1, sometimes 1,000 to 1, whatever that case might have been in currency against an asset, be it a bond or something else, they had to always put something in. So this was designed by the controllers at the top they knew how greedy they were. And they knew that all these digits and everything that they claimed to have was a perfect way to get them to keep feeding assets to the controller. And the controller didn't have to do anything. He just used to sit back and wait for the little slave masters to keep donating assets in. So some of the things that would have been pledged as far as the United States would have been actual in-ground assets and some above-ground assets. Namely, you had gold and some platinum and some other minerals and whatnot that were granted into the trust to continuously get funds out of the trust. So even after we went off an asset-based system or the gold standard, they were still giving bonds, debt instruments against the Treasury Department, debt instruments against the Federal Reserve, debt instruments from the states, municipal bonds, all these types of things, and they all landed in the same place. So that's what I meant by assets that had been pledged by people who used to manage the trust before, or well, not manage it, used to participate in the trust before, and they need to be returned. Because the assets were traded against, there's a large amount of allocation numbers available, should they want to use those, or now they can have the right to issue their own. They don't need any of the currency that's in there.
Yeah. And with this new system, is it not the case that the assets have to be shown as proof? And this is why the famed RV cannot go ahead, because they don't have the assets to support what they're asking for.
Well, to put it in a very simplistic form, before the electronic system went live and then all of the assets were registered into the electronic system, that took a number of years to actually complete. And there were a lot of SKRs and whatnot with codes and random numbers on them, and nobody really understands where the real assets are anymore and where they went. So you could have a vault number that was registered to a bunker in Kenya supporting a currency in Switzerland. You could have a vault number in Germany supporting an asset, an allocation number in the United States. You could have something in the United States supporting something in China. Okay. Nobody understands how the cross-collateralization system ever worked, nor did they ever care. All they cared about was that they put something in, and they get 100 times what they put in out.
Back out, yeah.
Yeah.
Not good. Not good. So, after doing all that, the work with the Kingdom of Manna and declaring them sovereign, you then went on to in another one of your hats, the many hats. You then went on about drafting a letter to Mr. Trump, which was hand-delivered on January the 27th of this year. What is the significance of that announcement?
Well, the main reason I decided to do the letter without asking for permission or letting him know it was available and then granting it was predominantly due to the fact that these groups of dragons continuously are half of everything we have, as they say, to these other people.
Yeah.
So that's why, and we kind of used a little bit of a loophole to get it delivered because it was being blocked many different ways. But the significance of it is, number one, the Crown Corporation, which was formed by Rothschild, which was part of the trust, is no longer under Rothschild, and now it's under the trust. So any assets acquired by them over the years is now in the trust. So it needs to come out of the trust. So one of those assets being every country was registered as a sub-sovereign to the main sovereign, which was the trust. And every central bank was registered as ownership underneath Crown Corporation, which was a sub-corporation to the trust.
Yeah.
So by signing over, firstly, sovereignty, which means that that America, or the Republic, is equal now to the trust.
Yeah.
So that means they're two separate sovereignties. One is not controlled by the other anymore. Therefore, any sub-asset base that was underneath the trust no longer has any rights, including any rights to give orders or directives to the military, including any rights to give orders or directives to the Treasury Department, including any rights to give orders or directives to the President of the United States. And no, the Queen does not have to do the second inauguration ceremony with the President anymore. So this USA Inc. was something totally different. But to answer your question, it's no longer a part of the organization and is an entity unto itself.
So basically,
second asset that had to be, I'm sorry.
So basically, the Crown, that, because most Americans think we got independence from Britain and the Crown in 1776. Those who have seen the documents know different. And quite clearly, we're still under their control via the Crown, via the Rothschilds, and subsequently the Trust. And that notification, or that declaration, basically cuts them off from any control of America, the Republic, or the country.
Well, exactly, that's true. And the Queen used to be the sovereign over the 300 families.
Yeah.
Family doesn't necessarily mean actual last name family or blood-related family. It can be an organization as well. The reason for that is because the Rothschilds basically married into every single royal family that there was. They were commoners when they started 400 and some odd years ago. A little over 500 years ago now.
Yeah.
So they used her to assign them as monarchs or royal monarchs and sovereigns, and therefore they were responsible for managing the United States for the rest of the period of time. But was it ever a separate entity? No, because the main sovereign existed, for thousands of years. This is not a new thing. It's just new in the fact that it went electronic in the 70s.
Yeah. So the Queen is no longer the head of that Crown, as I understand it. And from what I'm led to believe, she's kind of helping things as best she can, despite certain threats to her life, as I know. And so where does she now fit in with things? Does she just is basically reduced to a puppet, or can she help any further?
Well, I mean, for all intents, she's still the reigning monarch over the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
And it is still a constitutional monarchy. The thing she can't do is assign sovereignty to any subgroup anymore. And that is where all the threats to her have come. And she's basically relieved at this point to say that, I'm sorry, that's not me anymore. So, her son is still working with the groups. If anything were to ever happen to her before this is completed, then, he would obviously sign off on it, and then the trust would renege it.
Yeah.
Because we have veto right over what it is all of the other families do.
Right. That's good. So, where does sovereignty apply to the Crown and now the USA Inc., and is that all dissolved and onwards to the Vatican? Where does that all come in now?
Well, the sovereignty of the nation itself is one thing. USA Inc. was more under the SESQV agreement and tied to the Holy See than it was the Crown. So USA Inc.'s job under the old structure was to serve as a liaison against all of the birth certificate bonds you hear so much about and the collection of taxes. They were issued against future tax payments of the person. In exchange for that, there were funds that would come out for socio-humanitarian programs like EBT programs, food stamp programs, protection of the individuals, such as the military, Coast Guard, police force. There were funds that would come out for the Department of Education so that every citizen could have free public education. This was the purpose of the program. However, it was like that maybe for the first year or two of its inception, and they were taking maybe 10%, skimming off the top, and then it reverted down to about 2%, actually going into like Social Security, Medicare, all of the socio-humanitarian programs offered by the government for the benefit of the people. And that is where the problem started. So the contract between a corporation and a sovereign is an agreement. An infinite agreement under international law is 99 years for a corporation. Yeah. So that agreement expired in 2000, and I think it was 2014, 2013, and the corporation went defunct at that time. The asset base is still here to support those programs, but only directly to the government now.
Right.
No longer through a third-party entity. The Holy See does not have access to that anymore, aka the Vatican or any of its sub-entities, and it's just been sitting there. So there are accounts that are labeled Social Security and Department of Education and FDIC and all of these other consumer protection agencies that exist.
So the food stamps and the Social Security comes out of the trust, and
through the Ways and Means Committee from USA Inc. is how it used to go, but now they're just sitting there. Yeah. So yes, there's plenty of funding for all those programs.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is obviously people make Social Security payments. Is that going in that fund, or is that being skimmed off? And those funds were already there for the Social Security to begin with, and what people are paying in their wages each week is going into some black budget or being siphoned off. Is that the case?
Well, I don't run the government, but I will tell you this much. Starting about a year or two ago, the Dragon families were siphoning all of the asset base for a lot of these pension fund programs, including military pensions and government pensions, teachers' pensions, Social Security funds, and then they were returning them back to the government like they were the hero. The problem is that the last time they tried to do it, the allocation numbers didn't match up. And they put them into a off-ledger server under the UN, and they couldn't figure out how to get them back out. Wow. So when that server crashed, it left the government basically with nothing but a bunch of mirrors that they kept recreating over and over again and just telling them that they couldn't spend them. So is there a Social Security fund? Yes. Here, as soon as anybody is ready to use it, they can have it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just mind-boggling. A lot of people won't know what mirrored accounts are. Can you give a description of what that means and what that entails?
Could you repeat?
A lot of people, when we talk about mirrored accounts, what does that entail? Because there'll be a lot of people who don't understand that term. So, can you give us a brief description? The mirror accounts.
Oh, mirror accounts. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. Your accent. Basically, what they do is they put up a secondary computer system. Usually they use the supercomputer or some elaborated server somewhere, and they put an attachment to a banking institution, and it will reflect that there is a balance of X amount of dollars on a particular account because they're going in through the back door of the bank. The problem with that is that there isn't an actual legal allocation of currency tied to those numbers. Meaning, they usually do some ridiculous amount, and normally it's USD, so it would be like $100 trillion or something. And so, of course, the U.S. government cannot support an influx of $100 trillion in one day into the system. It just simply doesn't have that production line, and it does not have the asset base to support that type of an amount coming into the system. Yeah. Therefore, eventually the mirrors go away. And that's what everybody thinks of when they say the RV has happened, the money is in the account, we can see it, it's going to be released, it's going to get liquid, it's going to, all these things, but it's not possible. No. And remember, the goal of the dragons is actually to transfer power from the Eastern families to the Western, from the Western families to the Eastern families. So, of course, one of the easiest ways to do that would actually be a large influx of dollars, which would devalue the dollar to pennies on the dollar of what it is today. Yeah. So it would achieve their goal one way or another, but everybody only looks at it as the me, I have 4 quad in dinar, I have this, I have that, I need to cash it in. But unfortunately, if that actually happened, your dinar would be worth more in just stationary value, meaning like a notebook, stationary, than your dollar would be at that point if that had actually taken place in the manner in which they're trying to achieve this.
Yep. So this is this goes back to pretty much to the 1990s when a lot of the American companies and the European companies were all transferred into the East, and people thought, or what we were fed was that it's cheaper labour over there, but it wasn't really. It was more to do with getting ready for 2013 for the Federal Reserve Beijing. And so the finances will all be stationed over there, and they're already in place. And of course now, given that the Federal Reserve Beijing didn't take place in 2013, what we're seeing now is that companies are coming back because they're not going to get their Federal Reserve and the the Chinese elders running the monetary system for the next 100 years, which was what the agreement was in 1912, 1913, was it not?
Yeah, they started this program of who would be the next world power, so to speak, in, I think, the 75, 76. And yes, they all started their migration to the East based on the fact that they were all promised, board member positions of the families over there. So for them, nobody really cared if they were sitting on the right or sitting on the left. They were still sitting at the top. So yes, they knew that back in those days that the U.S. economy was going to crash. That's what their plan was, and that they were going to be on the board of the Chinese elders family, which elders doesn't necessarily mean Chinese, and and that they would be safe. When that became apparent that the elders were not going to be able to achieve that goal because they weren't getting their codes either, they started talking about moving everything to Norway, whereby they would actually move the UN out of the United States and over to Norway. They would be using oil based in the north and in the Middle East to back a new currency, and they would run their sovereignty, quote unquote, out of the UN. So as of right now, I think they're still running both of those plans congruently, it looks like to me anyway.
Yeah, this is the NATO crew, isn't it? All stationed in Norway, and Rothschild's private army group. We've warned of Norway on the THI show for the last 2 or 3 years. It's just a different, let's just move sticks, but it's the same group at the end of the day, with Rothschild's always in the midst of it, because it's my understanding that the Rothschilds have their finger in every pie. That's why their name always comes up. They kind of back every horse. Is that the case?
Yeah, if there's 8 horses in a race, they will back all 8. They have some of the plans of the former controller, but not all. That's why everything seems to be kind of getting halfway to where it's going, and then it fails. The group from the north that promised them that they could achieve this goal was the one of their worker groups, also known as the AAA, and if you're not white, you're not right group.
Yeah.
So they are the ones that are doing a lot of the work to try to make that transition to Norway. On the other side, you still have the elders working away in accordance with their plan, and either way it works out, the American faction and the British faction and the European factions all still have their seats no matter what. So, they put their position in firm no matter which group it is, and all these groups worked for them anyway.
Yeah.
So, since the days of Hitler.
Right. But you've spoken to most, if not all, of the governments, and at times with the Rothschilds and various other groups. Are you seeing a change of attitude or a mellowing out where they realise that they've all been lied to and they're all on a wrong path, and they've all been promised these titles in this country and that land and king of this and king of that, and suddenly realise that they've had enough and are stepping down and actually helping? Is that the case?
On the government level, a lot of the governments, including the China government, are aware that these people are not going to be able to achieve what they want to achieve. China government does not want the responsibility of having the singular world power. Russia doesn't want that either. And all of the other countries are kind of just, in my talks with them, they want the development, they understand their asset bases, they understand where they need to go. You still have some of the central bank governors, some of the people intertwined within the government that are waiting for the Chinese elders to fund. Also part of the reason for the letter here. Yeah. We're doing those letters everywhere. Yeah. And a lot of them are actually cleaning their house, so they are getting ready for the next step. There's still a lot of threats that come out. The IMF can be very threatening. Bank for International Settlements can be very threatening. That's why part of the reason why the big push right now, we do have a new administration. He's been about, in a little over a year, and he's gaining a lot of ground. So, I thought it was time to start with where, the world recognizes the U.S. as a powerhouse. and a power center and a leader. And if the U.S. does what they need to do, then the fear and one of the threats that often comes out is whether it be NATO or the, U.S. military is going to come attack you. I mean, I've heard all these stories before from various heads of state, and I think everybody's realizing that they don't really have that kind of control over the U.S. government, and without the U.S. military, NATO is nothing anyway.
Yeah.
Or very, very little. If U.S. jumped away from NATO, all of the other allied nations would jump away from NATO probably as well. I would think. That's my guess.
Yeah.
From the outside looking in.
So in essence, the America's sovereignty sets a snowball that keeps on rolling and doesn't stop till all 209, really. It's given the courage to the other nations who have been at the behest of Rothschild's banks or under control of the crown, to gain their own sovereignty and stand in their own right and not at the behest of some sort of superpower, as they're called, even though that's a misnomer in itself, because the superpower is all behind the scenes and they just use the countries to play out a game.
Yes, that's true. That's the way it always was.
Yeah.
And the trust assigning over sovereignty to all the countries means that the trust no longer has the capacity to call and control anything either.
Yeah.
So, this, when the trust gave it up, it also, doesn't have the capacity to say, look, you need to take this funding, you need to do this, you need to do that, any longer either.
Yeah.
I mean, they're on their own. If they want some of the accounts, some liquidity and whatnot, great. You can have them, right? But the people also get their part too.
Yeah.
So the way let's call it the gentleman's agreement that's in place at the moment involves a very small leverage, not a large leverage. It involves the return of an asset base plus additional assets should they require to support the current amount of real currency in circulation, plus up to 3 times the current GDP of each nation. So the stipulation is there has to be a production line. You can't just influx ridiculous amounts of currency into the system, fiat or otherwise, even with a matching asset base, unless you have a production line to warrant that amount of currency coming into the system. We use real numbers, not like the numbers the IMF uses.
Yeah.
We actually use real math, not some strange UN math, and that is the way it has to play out. So we figured out that if we did a leverage of maybe 50 to 1 maximum, and under the original charter of the U.S. Treasury, or Department of Treasury, which is the actual government department, they're allowed up to 60 to 1. So we figured if we did 50 to 1 against the asset base, 25 to 1 staying with the government, and 25 to 1 coming out to the people in the form of project funding or humanitarian funding, that does a number of different things. It increases the production line of the country because we are a democracy and a capitalist society, so the government doesn't actually produce. It's the people that produce.
Yeah.
So that increases the production line and allows for the distribution of additional funds. And, as you know, you and I have discussed a number of different programs and large production lines to actually make that happen. If more liquidity is needed at a more rapid pace, it has to be done virtually everywhere, all at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, there is a pot of money, and our members will remember when I described this when Wells Fargo were asking for 60 quad or 80 quad, and the military were asking for 160, and you can't just put that straight in the system because it just collapses in on itself. And basically what needs to happen is, for argument's sake, let's just use organic farming. The people decide they want to roll out an organic farming, and that's going to cost 100 trillion. So the 100 trillion matches the program. Then it has a balance to the system, because you've injected 100 trillion, but you've got an asset that supports the 100 trillion, which then doesn't imbalance the system. So if there's a need for a product, or a need for organic farming or health clinics, or let's not call them health clinics, let's call them cure clinics, and it matches that fund, and it's obviously beneficial to the people, then that then balances the books, and it doesn't tip the whole system upside down, given the way it operated previously as a debt-based system. And this is going to be asset credit-based more. Is that correct?
Well, yes, it's an asset. That's an asset-based system. You're actually producing a product, and that doesn't necessarily have to be for example, the production of food. It could be building of a hotel. It could be, educational needs. It could be any number of different things. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're producing a product only. It just means that there has to be something produced out of the funds coming out. That balances it out. Plus, you have to take into account large amounts. If you're talking that large of an amount for something like organic farming, I mean, you could literally farm the whole galaxy for that.
No, I was just using that as an example. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you're talking about releasing large sums of funds, then I mean, you absolutely have to have an asset base, which means that you give me,
The other thing is, if we ever implemented a new, like, for argument's sake, a transport infrastructure, I think Trump touched on that, or rebuilding a lot of the bridges. I think there's 80,000 bridges at the point of collapse in this country. And Trump mentioned a figure of $1.5 trillion to improve the infrastructure. Obviously, that can be supported, because there is the need for that amount of money to be spent, and because we've kind of let this country collapse in on itself in a way.
Well, and absolutely. And if you're a contractor and you're a contract company that builds bridges or builds roads, do you need permits? Sure. But it can be done on a private basis, as long as the contractor is happy with the fact that they're a contractor. They make money like every other service provider does, right? They're not owning the bridge. They're just providing a service, like a government service agent, right? So, the bridges technically belong to the people, right? The people pay the taxes in their city, state, because you just bought a car or some other item at the store, and you paid your state tax, or, your city tax, or you rent a hotel room, you still have to pay that tax. So, tax is a whole other story. But anyway, the point is that you're actually making your contribution into the rebuilding of that bridge. Unfortunately, we have that other group of people that still are claiming they own all the taxes in the country, which is not correct. But that's the point is you're a user of the bridge, and you are a shareholder as a citizen of that state, and you're making that contribution to the bridge. That's how it was supposed to be. Unfortunately, there's a lot of unwinding and fixing to do, but there is a very large development and infrastructure fund within the trust. It was formed shortly after World War II, and it was called the Plan of Experts. Now, you probably have heard some of these people on the internet talking about what they thought the Plan of Experts was. But what the Plan of Experts actually was designed to do is, on any kind of government purchase, such as if the government is building a bridge or the government is buying pencils for a schoolhouse, either way, if the government is making a purchase, be that federal, city, state, or provincial in some areas of the world, the trust will actually provide a supplement of up to 50% of the cost of the purchase of the item. So that allows for the dollars that are going in or other currencies going into the respective governments to have double the value that they would have had otherwise. Because if, for example, if another country somewhere else in the world needs pencils and they're buying them from an American company, we can do that in U.S. dollars. That's going to support the production line because they're going to obviously have to increase their production of pencils over here in the U.S., right?
Yes.
And the asset base is provided to the government on the same leverage pretense, but the receiving government, although they're paying for X amount of pencils, they only have to pay half price, but the manufacturer is still receiving 100% of the purchase price of them.
And those two songs, Kimberly's Call, and When Kimberly Calls, you better listen, because things are moving rather quickly. And the last one was John Farnham and You're the Voice with Jimmy Barnes, one of my favourites. So we're going to get into a bit more of the Trump letter that was delivered. It was also acknowledged, verified and accepted. And one of the aspects of it, it said the right to hold central banks, military and agencies. So can you explain that to the listening public, please? The right to hold central banks, because most people think we already have a central bank, but that's not the case.
Well, under the structure of the trust, remember every country was a sub-sovereign.
Yeah.
And under some of the agreements, that meant that they basically the trust had ownership over all central banks worldwide. So as an actual sovereign, separate of the trust now, that means that the U.S. has the right to hold its own central bank, which has nothing to do with the trust whatsoever. Of course, there's going to be a transitionary period for that to happen so that they can have their asset base returned to them officially.
Yep.
But they now have the right to print their own currency without involving any dragon family of any sort or any other entity, including myself, including the trust.
Right.
So, to be very clear, one of the other aspects of the letter was that the Federal Reserve was part of that because it was a privately held corporation.
Yes.
So when the agreement between the government and the Federal Reserve expired in 2012, the agreement with the trust to fund the Federal Reserve expired in 2011. There is no obligation of the U.S. government anymore to a private corporation. Therefore, that corporation was turned over under a treaty. Very important that everybody understands that this is a treaty, not a corporate agreement. It is an infinite treaty, which means that the government cannot turn power of that corporation over to any other entity for a period of 499 years.
Oh.
So it's exclusively theirs now. That's the reason why I called it a treaty.
Yeah.
Because under international law, we've got at least 500 years to fix this. So,
how many lifetimes are we coming back? Oh, blimey, 500 years.
Oh God, if I do, I hope it's not in this job. I want to be a cat, I think, or a dog or something.
Oh, please, not a cat. Don't start me with cats. Oh, no.
I did that for you.
I'll have the cat police after me. Right, the military, as I understood it, and given the wording of the letter, the American government didn't have control of the military at all. And now they do have control. Did I read that right?
True. That is correct. The reason why is because long before we had governments. We had kingdoms. Long before we had kingdoms, we had tribes. And when global martial law was declared thousands of years ago, that meant the ultimate controller was the controller of all militaries worldwide, which is how they used to get away with playing their games of pitting one against the other, because it controlled them legally. Yeah. It's also the reason why, for example, if you're talking about the U.S., why orders could have come from Rothschild or from the U.K. Over its agencies, intelligence agencies, or its military, because ultimately that order then went to somebody else, who went to somebody else, who went to somebody else, who ultimately went to the dictator or the major general over all of military operations worldwide. So now that the U.S. is an actual sovereign unto itself, it now owns its own military with no possible interference from any one of these private groups, including Chinese elders or dragons or Rothschilds or any of the other groups that claim that they have the right to order the military around. They don't. The commander-in-chief, also currently known as President Trump, is the president of the Americas. He is the president of the United States. He is the commander-in-chief, and he is the one that can dictate what the military does or doesn't do without any interference from a third-party entity, including the trust, any longer.
Great stuff. And the agencies, I think it's been well documented that the three-letter agencies and some of the four-letter acronyms that most people think belong to the United States of America or America the country, but are also private agencies, and now they also come under the control of the American government.
That's true. The issue that you have at the moment seems to be that there are various societies intertwined within agencies, and all of them are still talking, right? But, you know, in reality, it's just talking. They actually belong to the U.S. They are the U.S. government's arms, so to speak, and the government is responsible for funding them, no other third party. Now, under some of the old agreements, it used to be where agencies could fund other agencies because they were all part of the same group. For example, sometimes, you know, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, I've heard, you know, in the recent past whereby MI6 was saying that they could fund and control, say, the, you know, CIA or some other agency, and that is not the case, especially since there's now documented proof under a treaty that that is no longer the case.
Good.
So, you know, you still have intertwining societies, you still have a lot of confusion, you still have a lot of groups of people still trying to execute on the plans of the others, but there's no legal capacity to act in that
framework,
in that fashion anymore. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is where the cleaning up and cleaning house and draining the swamp comes in, you know, and if you are able to put two and two together, there has been evidence, bundles of evidence, not only in this country but globally, certain presidents going down and vice presidents going down, and it's always about fraud and corruption, but there's a lot more to it than what is being portrayed to the public, as we understand it.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, I've had people, you know, in and around the peripheral over here, wanting to have conversations, telling me that they work for the real president of the United States. And I'm like, well, who is that? And of course, it's always Anne, or, you know, Obama still is running around ahead of Trump to all these meetings in Davos and whatnot, claiming he's the real president of the United States still, and by its association with the old order.
Yeah.
You know, it's the reason why there's so much conflict between with the Democrats right now, because they're all reporting to who they believe to be the real president of the United States, and that's why I think that it was really good timing for this letter to go out, because, any misconception of that actually being the case is, is cleared up. But that doesn't mean that, for example, Anne or somebody else or Hillary or whoever is not holding a lot of dirt, because they all went to these crazy meetings and did these crazy things, right?
Yeah.
So, they would rather do what it is they say than be exposed for what it is they did. But, that's happening anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So the Federal Reserve is now defunct. And I don't know whether I've got this correct or not. Perhaps you can enlighten us. They haven't had the ability to print notes since 2009, if memory serves me correctly, and that is correct. And so what's going to happen to them now their contracts run out, and what do you foresee for the Federal Reserve and subsequently the IRS? So that's a big one for a lot of people. Is there a role or a place for them in a sovereign nation, or do they both have to go?
Well, the Federal Reserve is now a government entity legally. They have not had the capacity to issue U.S. dollars on behalf of the government since June 15th, 2011 was the date. The reason why you're saying 2009 is because what they have done recently is the private Fed party have used old allocation numbers from 2009 and 2010 and have printed up what we call super notes or duplicate numbers. So by allocation, if you pull the dollar out of your pocket, it will have a serial number on it. So an allocation number says serial numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 through 234, as an example, and that is the allocation issued by the Reserve at the time to print more dollars, and it was always signed off on by the trust, because the trust was the asset provider. Yeah. So at the time, prior to these dates, it didn't matter if it was a Chinese person signing it, or an American guy signing it, or a British guy signing it, or whomever was representing the trust at that time. So that aspect has been gone for a long time, but nobody has been discussing it. Now that there's no liquidity, they're actually using super notes to make deposits in banks all over the country. Previously issued allocation numbers that were tied, like, for example, some of the notes that I had seen with my own two eyes and in my hands came out of Wells Fargo. And those notes serial numbers were tied to an allocation which was granted in 2009 to the UN for a UN program. So we kind of already know, based on where that serial number came from. By the way, that number was canceled. That allocation number was canceled because it was already used. So do they run through all of the machines saying they're valid notes? Well, yes, because they're still being printed by the Reserve. And my concern is that there were hundreds of billions of dollars they were intending to put into the system. I heard like some odd $14 trillion or something. But by cutting off the allocation numbers, that kind of stopped a lot of that from happening. I think they rang up to about 100 billion or something like that worldwide in these notes. Now, when the Federal Reserve has been transferred to the government, the power of the pen to issue paper currency is no longer in private hands. So does the trust still hold allocations of USD? Yes, it does. Does it hold allocations of USD it has not used yet? Yes. Can it use that? Well, yes, it's no different than you, the private person, holding dollars in your pocket. However, because the amounts are so large, That would be a cooperative effort between the government and the trust, and it would go to develop projects within the United States or other industries in which the U.S. dollar is used, such as buying and selling of gold, buying and selling of oil. These things right now are all done in USD. Whether that stays the case, I don't know. But as far as the running of the actual reserve, it is now the responsibility of the U.S. government and cannot be dictated by a private entity. It has to be signed off on by Congress, and in matters of national security, it can be signed off on by the president. But just as the mint mints coins, now the government also prints U.S. dollars. So it doesn't have to wait for money from Rothschild or anybody else anymore. And I wanted that to be very clear on the air because I'm hoping that everybody listening understands what it is we're saying. This is one of the most important things and one of the biggest problems that the government is having. Also, to address another issue, there was something called the Treasury of the United States, and there was also something called the Treasury of China. These two departments were not government entities. These two departments were faction or family-run entities. And so they were the face front for the trust as only trustees, and only one of the signatures required in order to release funds, because remember, the ultimate dictator always had control. He could reject anything they did at any time during the course of the time when they actually had some power over the trust. So the fact that the Treasury of China and the Treasury of the United States, which has nothing to do with the Department of Treasury, traded amongst each other assets from the same pot, does not mean that the government owes money to the Treasury of China, which is the Chinese elders. Yeah. It does not mean that at all, because it all came out of the same pot, and they were just little comptrollers running around putting codes into a system. Does the government of China actually hold debt of the United States, such as treasury notes? Of course they do, but it is normal numbers. It might be hundreds of billions of dollars, but it's not hundreds of trillions of dollars. And the claims being made by the Chinese elders are false. Yeah. Does the trust hold Department of Treasury U.S. government debt? It does. Has that debt been matched up with an equal amount of allocations of dollars to be nullified as soon as the government is ready? Yes. Do we have to talk to a Chinese elder to make that happen? No. Was it cut off of Chinese assets? No. It was just simply a bunch of people doing a job by collecting assets of the entire planet Earth and feeding them to the dictator. Yeah. That is the way the trust was structured. So these claims that they're making to the U.S. government, like the Chinese elders own you, that is a lie, and it needs to stop. And China wants it to stop too, because it's put the two countries at odds with each other when neither one of them agrees with what the elders are doing, be them American, British, or Asian.
Yeah. Good stuff. So where does the real U.S. Treasury stand currently? Are they waiting on transfer of funds so they can get up and running?
Well, at the moment, yes. They are meeting with a lot of resistance, as there's a lot of people talking. For example, it was about a week or so ago, we had already set up the transfer to happen. The funds had already been verified by the Treasury Department, already been verified by the President, and everybody was ready to pull the trigger, and in walks Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger explains that there's a contract between the military and the Chinese elders for something or other. I won't get into details. I think you've already talked about it. I don't need to reiterate it. But the point is that they're saying that they have to pay the elders. That's not going to happen.
No.
So everything kind of got a little bit, like there was a lot of legalities that were being discussed over the last weekend, and we hopefully will be ready to go with the first ones in the next coming days. But Henry Kissinger himself, by the way, tried to access the system, thinking because he was a member of the Trilateral Commission that he still had some kind of access, about 2 hours after that meeting. And the system rejected, access denied. So, you know, all of this keeps happening, you know, and why, you know, anybody entertains these people is beyond me. You know, probably because they have a special name. So I thought to myself, well, seems if you have a special name and you're not just some lady coming out of the blue, things happen for you, right?
Yeah.
So I thought I had two choices. I could get a Chinese old man costume and rock up at the White House, because that seems to work every time. I mean, you can say anything you want. I mean, you could say the sky is orange, the Empire State Building needs to come down today, and they're just going to do it. So I figured, hey, that's an option, right? So if, in light of not doing that, the other option was to start to have conversations with well-recognized people that are of like mind with all of us, that are known, for example, for writing books about the economy and these types of things. So these negotiations are also going on as well. So should we continue to have the same problem between getting an old Chinese person costume or bringing other well-known economists to the table, I think I'm going to pick the well-known economists and perhaps other types of professionals in different fields, whether it be people who realized what Big Pharma was doing and decided to vacate from their family companies, or things of this nature, because it seems like if these people come forward as the face front saying, okay, no, we're not going to do opiates anymore, we're going to produce this natural medicine or this cure for this or this cure for that, and because their last name is a well-known last name, the industry won't balk at that person. So these are the types of negotiations we've started having for the last couple of weeks now, with some parties that have agreed to participate in the process, because they too want to see that change happen. And they're going pretty well. So I think that I won't have to get that Chinese person costume after all, and we'll be able to move forward. Should this continue in the same fashion?
Yeah. But slowly but surely, although it has increased dramatically over the course of this calendar year, progress is being made on all levels, whether it's talking to certain higher profile individuals, exposing the folly with Kissinger and the ridiculousness of them playing the game and demanding this and demanding that when there's no proof to substantiate it, and quite honestly that they're making fools out of themselves, and they have to realise the game's up. They had their game, they had their contract, it ran out in 2012, and it's time to step down, and let the people who own the real wealth in this world come forward, and hopefully, there's no guarantees, as you know, hopefully we can create a better world for the benefit of all, not some select group of families or bloodlines or anything else for that matter, So it's positive stuff. So we had
and that is the hope.
Yeah. We had now we're on treasuries, because I do know this was involved, and we had a group 3 or 4 years ago which we did warn those people not to continue their folly. The OPPT people had a giraffe. Unfortunately, they had a misunderstanding, whether it was deliberate or not, of certain treasuries, and they went after a certain account. And of course, Miss Giraffe is now facing 15 to 20 years in prison, along with the sidekick. What was your understanding of the other treasuries? They went after the wrong treasury account, did they not?
Well, the birth certificate bonds that they were making claims against never went to the U.S. government.
Yeah.
They never went to the Department of Treasury. It had nothing to do with them, and 95% of the people that worked there didn't even know they existed.
Yeah.
This program started years ago, as you know, right, wrong, or indifferent. The intention, I think, was, you know, the people that had agreed to it back in the day, I think that the intention wasn't bad. Free public education, a lot of other things that a lot of other citizens in other countries don't have. So I understand the pretense behind it. I also understand the sorcery aspect behind it, and that needed to end anyway. But as a byproduct of that, the Treasury of United States was the one that was feeding the bonds. Remember I said that on a level 6, right, which was your Treasury of United States people, your families, your factions, right, your Rothschilds, your Rockefellers, all these people, the Federal Reserve Board people behind the board, not the ones that are on television.
Yeah.
Those people had to give something to the trust in order to get something out. So, be it a bond, be it a bar of gold, be it of anything, they had to make their offering to the master. Now, in this case, the offering, and it goes very deep, but let's just say the offering was sold. More slaves. They sold slaves. That's what they did. So, long and the short of it, when the U.S. becomes sovereign, so do all its citizens, and there's no right of the trust or any sub-sovereign or sub-organization to make claim against those bonds anymore. So, therefore, you know, there's talk about SQV, there's talk about the Vatican, there's talk about the Holy See, and that's all really wonderful. But once the U.S. becomes a sovereign unto itself, its citizens also become sovereigns unto themselves and no more at the behest of any SQV agreement. So they do not have the right for any child born after the date of that letter to issue any kind of bond against that child. That is an illegal thing, and the trust has not been buying those bonds since 2007 anyway. So the bonds that are left here held within the trust need to be returned anyway.
Yeah. And
there's no collection to be had like they think. So calling the U.S. Treasury Department and asking them, okay, you're talking about like two separate countries, right?
Yeah.
Or two separate corporations. It's like if Enron owed you money, you're going to start suing Apple.
Yeah.
And Apple's going to say, I don't know anything about what the heck happened at Enron. Right?
Yep.
Or Samsung owes you money and you're suing Apple. They're two separate entities. There were two separate, one was a sub-sovereign, one was a sovereign, and the two had nothing to do with each other. So, you know, they don't understand when you're bringing debt claiming that it's owed to them from an organization that knows nothing about the program. The only thing they knew is that every year when it came time for budget money to come for the Department of Education or schools or whatever, that the money would come out.
Yeah.
The claim against the taxes at the IRS was a whole nother story. That was the coupons on the bonds, which was meant to pay back the trust, not Rothschild.
Yeah.
Now, did Rothschild skim all that money? Of course they did.
Yep.
They're skimming money off of everything, right? That tax money now is actually owed to the United States government proper. The IRS needs to come back to the United States, in my opinion, and then any changes to tax law that's made, this is why Trump's tax bill went through. So any changes to taxes collected by a United States government entity remain within the United States for the United States budget. It doesn't go to the Federal Reserve anymore. It doesn't go to pay coupons on Treasury notes to an entity which belongs to itself.
Yeah. Well,
See, so there's obviously going to be some duplicity going on here, and I'm sure that they're going to have to figure that out. But the point is that those taxes are supposed to go to the government now for programs that the government is funding. But this is part of the reason why they're saying, oh, we have to cut food stamps or SNAP or however you call it, EBT, whatever it's called now, because nobody understands the mechanism that was put in place. Yeah. Given the opportunity, all those things will be explained, and the account will be provided because it was already in existence. Yeah. Now, as far as the budget is concerned for, how much is going to be allocated to the SNAP program or to the CHIPS program, the Child Health program, or any of these other programs, that is Congress. That is the president's got to sign the bill. That is how that's supposed to work. But the fund for those things is there. Totally, it's just that the accounts that were at the reserve have to be turned over, right?
Yeah. Well, one hopes, the IRS is a big thing amongst the members of the alternative community, and obviously now a lot of them are being made aware that the income tax was largely going to the Federal Reserve and the Crown, and nothing to the American government or the people. And obviously,
that's right. Now, Crown is Rothschild.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, some would say that we should have all that money back because we've paid it voluntary, which is most Americans are not aware of. It's actually voluntary, even though they send stormtroopers round after you. But I would hope that Mr. Trump and his team and the government addresses the taxation where it's dropped to a very, very small amount going forward for the lower end people, given
one of the ways
that's largely paid for it.
Yeah, and one of the ways that was suggested is global trade is still done in U.S. dollars.
Yeah.
Bottom line. Now, the upcharge for U.S. dollars to other countries who are buying U.S. dollars so they can then buy oil or other commodities by the Federal Reserve was 10%. So if you needed $100, you had to pay $110 to get those dollars. Now that the Federal Reserve charge is now going directly to the government, because even if they're collecting it, they don't have the right to touch it anymore. And this has to be very clear and succinct. Yeah. The letter doesn't explain all of this, and maybe it should have, but I'm sure the conversation will come up later on. But the Federal Reserve 10% is no longer going to Rothschild or the behind the board of the reserve. It's going to the government. So the government could actually make good trade agreements with other countries by lowering that cost to, for example, 5%. Yeah. Now, given the amount of dollars that go into circulation every day, right? Yeah. That's still more than enough to compensate the government for its budget, even as astronomical as it is. World trade is at almost $100 trillion per annum. Yeah. And it's almost all done in USD at the moment. That's a lot of money. That's enough to pay the whole budget. You don't even need anybody else. And so once that charge is lowered, you'll find that we'll have many happy countries and many good solid trade agreements to buy and sell U.S. goods or other goods and services that are sold in USD. Now where does that leave us with the IRS? Well, the IRS can actually collect much less in tax from its citizens based on the fact that the U.S. government income just went up substantially. So they could pass that savings on to the average everyday citizen should they so choose it. And it appears that Trump is already starting to do that. But you got to remember, 99% of the country has no idea what you and I are talking about right now. So, that being said, God willing, right? Hopefully, once they understand how the mechanism works and how all of the money for the budget is available without collecting it from a citizen, there's still certain things that will have to be collected, I'm sure. Like, it costs money to repair and maintain roads. It costs money to repair and maintain bridges. But the good news is those things will actually be done now.
Yeah.
Right? And your money is going to the things that you are using as a citizen. You need to drive your car on a road. It's got to come from somewhere, right? You're willing to pay, 5% sales tax or 3% sales tax or something in order to make sure that road is there when you need it, right?
Yeah, but not.
I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, but not 20% like Chicago. It's,
No.
That would immediately get the people on side if they're noticing a substantial reduction in the sales tax, which is not required nowhere near the levels it was, and also in the income tax. Of course, then you've also got the issue that income tax is technically illegal under the Constitution because it's not capital gains. So again, that's something where the people themselves, once they become aware of all these issues, they're going to be demanding, well, hang on a minute. So something has to be substantial, in my opinion, be done on the taxes level to appease the people who find this out.
Well, and to add to that, just so you know,
Yeah.
that just because that group was siphoning off the funds that were due to the government, the United States has a unique structure. And in the backside of the system, it's still structured as in each state has its own income, and then they come together as a collective whole at a group, which became federal, right?
Yeah.
So each state still has its own fund with its own account, which was already collected, and since the other, the treasury of the U.S. people, they just collected the money and then spent it for geopolitical purposes. Yeah. The trust still traded against those assets that were contributed long ago from each state. So the dollars to match the assets that came from each state, a portion of that is federal and a portion of that is state. So it's structured, the United States structure is similar to what you're seeing, which started to become the European Union, where you had Italy making contributions to the European Central Bank. It was set up the same way in the United States. So that being said, each state has a budgetary fund of its own held within the trust that really technically and legally doesn't have anything to do with Congress.
Yeah.
It is state budget fund. Now, if they need to get funds from the federal government to go to the state, then that's a whole other story. But as for example, like for this wall that is a big controversial thing, each state can decide, each border state can decide, well, we want the wall. And if they all decide collectively that they want the wall, then the cost of that wall will come out of each one of these border states' funds.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take an act of Congress to make that happen. It only takes all of these state governments agreeing to the fact that they want this. And then it will come out of each respective state's funds. So it's, like you were talking about these funds on last night's show about these reserve emergency funds.
The CAFA accounts.
This is the reserve emergency funds everybody's talking about, and why don't they have any? Because they've been locked up here. And of course the Dragons Vital won't allow or are fighting against allowing those funds to come out, because then how are they going to control the Congress votes? How are they going to control the lobbyists? How are they going to control all these organizations? Nobody's going to listen to them anymore. If they get their own money and they're spending their own money, who's going to talk to these people except for the occasional person that did something at one of their parties, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Indeed.
Don't want to ruin their political career, their marriage, or whatever it is they have hanging over their head.
Yeah.
But you know, if congressmen weren't dinosaurs and in there for life, you know, 4 years from now, nobody's going to care what the last guy did, right?
Yeah.
So, anyway, I mean, there's a lot of different things that can happen, and these are just mere pointing out that these funds do exist, and yes, you're correct. They just don't have access.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was mentioned previously, and I'm wondering whether it's still the case, that the Cabal printed vast quantities of notes that were stationed in Hong Kong or somewhere in Asia anyway. But they were printed out, but they were not validated as they have no allocation numbers, as the governments, now they know the truth, are blocking it. Is that still the case?
Are we talking about U.S. notes, Treasury notes, Federal Reserve notes?
I think they were printing all. I think they were printing all
dinar,
Sims, dings and dongs and all that nonsense. I think they had a vast quantity of a warehouse full in Asia, from what I remember correctly, and they wanted allocation numbers, and the governments were blocking it in each country, so they were kind of stuck with them. Yeah.
So you're talking about an actual USD, as we know it, the Federal Reserve note, right?
Yeah, I think there was a bundle of currencies, so it might have just been the US dollar, but the allocation numbers are still being blocked, as I understand it.
Well, yeah, because they're already registered. See, this is everybody thinks AI is very scary and a very bad thing, but in actuality, when it's programmed correctly, it now does a search and destroy for any duplicate numbers. So what the dictator did is the dictator took every single allocation number, serial number in a vault, in a wherever, you know, it doesn't matter where it is. It registered it to itself because that was its self-interest payment. So it just took it. It took it itself. So all of these erroneous bills and bunkers and whatnot were all in vaults that belonged to the trust. Now, the trust took anything of worth and put it in a safe place, but as far as these notes, they just registered them to the backside system. So every time they try to register these things as live and real, the system rejects it. And it rejects it because it's a duplicate. It recognizes it as a duplicate, and the AI will win because legally it's recognizing the fact that that was an interest payment due to the trust, not to a dragon person to do their job. That was interest payments due against assets that were already registered to the trust. So that's why it rejects it constantly when they keep trying to do these duplicates. Same thing goes for the in-ground assets. The AI system recognizes that as a asset. It is already leaned in its database. So when it sees it trying to be registered to the Shanghai Exchange, including the BLM and other assets, it will reject it because that is a duplicate. It's already been leveraged. There's cash issued against it, and it has to be used by the rightful current owner of the in-ground assets, which is the nation and the people of the nation on which the assets originated. That is the only party that they will allow access to the in-ground assets. There is no dragon obligation listed anywhere in the system at all. So if China wants access to China's assets, all China has to do is take it. But it will not be registered to a private entity that the trust recognizes has been skimming the entire time. So the trust is going to say, okay, Mr. Dragon Elder number 1, you owe us $100 trillion for all the money that you have skimmed and improperly allocated against this in-ground asset. So if you'd like to have the asset, that's fine. Just pay us back. Oh, you don't have that kind of money? Well, that's no problem then. I guess it just goes back to the rightful owner because the lien period is now past due.
Oops.
So that is a positive thing about an AI system that is properly programmed.
Yeah.
Now, do I get these notifications every time they try to do it? Yes. It doesn't matter if it's 1 o'clock in the morning, midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. It, ring. Okay, no, block.
Oh, they must be planning the RV in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, the 800 numbers are coming out any minute now. But the elders all know this. They all know. They don't know how the AI system works because they never had access to the full system. They only had access to their little bits. The only thing they knew is they put the code in the bank, and then all the money came out, and they were the man to reckon with, right? With the power. So that's all they ever knew. They didn't care. All they wanted was the power. So the more power they got, the richer the dictator got. Until it was time for that to end.
Yep.
So.
Part of the letter says the trust held Washington, D.C., or the Rothschilds thought they held it, and what is better known as the District, or lesser known District of Columbia. How did that come about? Was that another one of those pledges? And
yes.
Yeah. So basically,
yes.
This was a pledge that then became, as we know, a separate principality, a separate state that was not affiliated to America or the people.
That is correct.
So when Mr. Trump, in his State of Union address, announced we're giving DC back to the people, was that significant?
It's a direct result of that, yes.
Yeah. So that was his endorsement of the letter. Now, the other thing he mentioned in the
public endorsement.
Yeah. The other thing he mentioned right at the end, normally they used to say, God bless the United States of America, but he didn't this time. He said, God bless America. Again, was that a hint to the public?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, for time we're doing okay. So, we've heard all about the bonds and the pledges and the trust being handed over and sovereignty and this and that and how they're blocked with the AI. But is there any possibility at this point that it can be turned around into another Cabal takeover, or is there a possibility in any way that sovereignty can be ignored? Because these are the questions that people would like answered.
Again, it was done as a treaty between two sovereign nations with no expiration date. Therefore, it exists and can only be broken by both sovereigns. So the current president or current commander-in-chief of the sovereign, known as the Republic, can only be reversed by decision between both parties.
Right.
So legally speaking, no. 499 years from now, if somebody, whoever that president is and whoever it is that exists on this other side, I'm hoping the trust does not exist by this point.
Yeah.
Because it shouldn't anymore. But if it did, whoever is next in both positions would then have a decision to make if they want to not be a sovereign anymore, something. But as far as the perception, because their last name is Rothschild, do they still have a right to walk into the White House? Well, Henry Kissinger walked in there, right?
For now.
Does it mean that the president has to listen to these people anymore and take orders from these people? No. Also, it's very important to understand that the military doesn't have to take orders from these people anymore. And neither does any intelligence agency have to take orders from these people anymore. Now, the strength behind what the president wants to do is my understanding, and what is going on currently is going to have to come from the military realizing that the hundreds of trillions of dollars promised by Rothschild for their dinar, they will have to collect from Rothschild. But as far as doing their job to protect and serve the United States or the United States citizens or the Republic is now their primary function. They do not have to listen to a Chinese elder anymore. The funds are all there to run the military. The deal has already been cut on the backside with China. There's 3 different options where the China government can then take over that contract and dissolve it.
Yeah.
The options are on the table. It's already been pre-negotiated. There's already an agreement in place. This is a threat to the government of China as well. They don't want to have this happen because it leaves them ripe if a private citizen is involved with a large amount of military equipment or anything else. So that actually can be dissolved. China government doesn't want a private citizen having battleships or something, right?
Oh.
Just as the U.S. government wouldn't want you to be riding in on a battleship either. I mean, right to bear arms is one thing. Right to bear a battleship or a nuclear weapon or something like that as a private citizen is a whole other story, right? Sovereign or otherwise.
Yeah.
So you become a threat. So all of those things, can be easily rectified, but are they still going to listen? I don't know the answer to that question. A lot of these people in the military have dinar. Are they going to think that they're going to pay? Well, we'll still collect their money, but can you please just do your job and protect the President of the United States and the Republic? That's all we ask, right? As citizens?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the public that's paid for them, and they're obligated now under the Republic, and presumably we've now gone back to the organic constitution, which for the first time in 1861. And so, they've got no excuses now to be doing bidding for NATO or the UN or Rothschilds or anybody else for collection of resources and land grabs and all kinds of other nonsense. And their obligation to me, given we spend vast quantities of our money on the American military, is they need to report back to the people. And I'm hoping, as a sovereign nation, Mr. Trump orders all the American troops that are dotted in 800 bases around the world back home. Because then we don't need walls. Then we can just put the troops, build a couple of little stations here and there along the Mexican border, and just station the troops there. So that the troops come home to their people, not dotted in some far-flung land at the behest of the former trust people and Rothschild. Enough's enough. It's costing the American people vast amounts of money to keep those bases going, and it would be better spent in this country, in my opinion.
Well, and the fact that in NATO treaty, the only reason why Rothschild et al., the elders and whatnot, thinks that they can control NATO is because they claimed that they signed as the other sovereign. Remember, everybody else that signed it, all the allied partners, were sub-sovereigns to the main sovereign. So the only thing that made that a treaty, which is the Atlantic Treaty, right?
Yeah.
Was because the trust actually signed it. Therefore, Rothschild is claiming that they have that right. But they haven't held that trustee position since 2012. So the fact that they're demanding all these countries donate equipment, money, and personnel to an organization, they don't have the right to say that anymore. Now, as soon as we finish all the sovereignties of Germany and all the other allied nations, right, then their militaries are no longer behooven to the trust or any former trustee or any former organization that may have been related to the trust as its former employees, basically, right? So that being said, then all of the sovereigns, which are, for example, the United States and Germany, can make an agreement no, we don't want to contribute to NATO anymore, and there's nothing holding them from contributing to NATO. Because the partner at NATO, the reason why the United States, for example, is obligated is because was obligated to the trust, not to Rothschild as its trustee.
Yeah.
So
understood.
That's another benefit. I saw something in the news today, like NATO wants to put bases in the U.S. now. That's crazy. I thought we were fighting the Russians. How far away are we from the Russian border? You remember NATO was formed to fight the Russians, right?
Yeah.
Suppose that the Russian threat, which they keep trying to make exist, that doesn't really exist anyway, but
No.
I guess, why would they be putting it, it says something in this article about putting it on the East Coast. If you were still fighting the Russians, right, wouldn't you put it over in Alaska?
Yeah.
You would put it closest to the Russian border, right?
Yeah.
I don't really understand why it goes on the East Coast.
Well,
or are you trying to threaten the Pentagon?
Yeah, nothing of that. What they do makes sense. It's all fun and games and clowning around. And, as time goes by, these people will become irrelevant. But it's going to... There's a lot of... and you will have met this more than I, a lot of mistrust because of the depth of the lies that it's being told to each group and each subsequent level. And it's going to take a little bit of time for people to gain that trust both ways. And, the fact that your team and yourself have done so much work with that, you've gone and met the enemy, so to speak. And, cards are on the table. Let's move forward in a better way. And one of the things that should be noted to all the people that listen to this show is this movement was done without the need for violence. That's the way forward for us all.
Well, and I've had plenty of opportunity to do the opposite, right? But like I tell everybody, I could have been just like them, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessary.
No.
I think everything can be done in a proper way. Not to say that they haven't sent many, many people, my way. But then they also figure, well, we don't know how the system works anyway. They have satellites pointed at my head, basically, waiting for some guy to come and deliver codes to me, right? Because that's what that always happened for them. Some guy came and delivered codes. So they think I must just be the same way.
Yeah.
And they just don't understand how it actually works. That's why.
Good. You touched on it before, global martial law. What is that definition? What does it all entail?
Well, the Global Martial Law Treaty was signed between a group and another group, both sovereign at the time.
Yeah.
It was done thousands of years ago. It is not something that's government related because there were no governments at that time. There were basically tribes, and one of the tribes was at war with another tribe. They needed advanced technologies in order to win the war. So they asked this other group of people for help. The technology and the weaponry was provided. The group won the war, but in exchange, they offered up basically the entire planet.
Oops.
And the main general at the time was the one that would have been in charge under martial law. And so his family, let's say, remained in charge ever since that day. So all of these kingdoms and the wars between kingdoms were nothing more than a collection agency for the main dictator, the main general. So the reversal, where we came in with a loophole, okay, so the agreements with the dragon families expired, but that still left the main controllers in charge. So how do you get rid of the global martial law treaty? You have to agree that you have to agree to a peace treaty.
Yeah.
And the predominant leaders of the planet have to agree. Now that's not government.
No.
Underneath the old structure, that wasn't government. That was actually the original tribes that were here in the first place. So recognized by the, let's call it the council, was any original tribe members that agreed to the peace treaty overrode the global martial law treaty. Yeah. Now that has nothing to do with government structures or anything of that nature. It just basically meant on the top level, when you start getting way above dragon family head, there was one overthrew the other. Just like they overthrew the others in the beginning, now that was reversed out where another group overthrew them.
Yeah.
So now they didn't have that right to rule over the next group and the next group and the next group and then eventually down to the families anymore.
So that treaty, is that almost completed now, or is it completed, and there's something that will take place in the future, hopefully fairly soon?
Yeah, there's one more piece to the puzzle that has to be completed. Everybody has signed off on it.
Cool.
And there's one more thing that has to be completed, which is the final ceremony.
Yeah.
We are losing ceremony members rapidly, but we still have enough. There only needs to be 3 to complete it. So that, I believe, will be completed before the end of 2018.
Good.
So it may not be the largest group as anticipated before, but it will still get done.
Yeah.
And that also involves something you were talking about on your show that you and I had discussed before about the restoration of what the council calls it, the archways of light. We would call it, and scientifically speaking, you're calling it changing the torus. You're calling it the restoration of source.
Yeah, energy.
So.
Good stuff. Where are we next? Neil Keenan came out recently. A lot of people keep mentioning Alberta.
He came out?
Yeah. I've seen his pictures of him in drag, so maybe it's correct. I don't know. But Keenan apparently, or whoever's representing Neil Keenan, because some people say he's not alive anymore, about a black book, and he was, I presume that's not some of the girlies he's with in Philippines and Thailand, but actually a financial book that he tried to sell or give to Trump. What is that book, and is it real now, or was it ever real?
What it appeared to me that this book was actually an old ledger from a former trustee. Sawarno, Suharto, the Ina, all those people were just Dragon family members. So I'm guessing any codes, if there was anything of that nature in there, or ledgers of accounts. Everything went electronic in 1978. That was long after that party was a trustee.
Yeah.
I'm guessing they're just old. It's just old information.
Yeah.
Are any codes from the Dragon family members, Indonesian or otherwise, valid? No.
No. So that's the end of that then. Talking about codes, I'll tell you what, I'll need to go back to.
He can feel free to enter them anywhere he wants to. I mean, go right ahead. It'll just end up like all the rest of them. Nobody really, and then we'll move on to the next elder, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the question about the tribes, this has nothing to do with the 12 tribes of Israel and in the biblical thing. This goes way back before then, doesn't it?
Way before there ever was a land called Israel, or Jerusalem, or Jesus, or thousands of Basal, or anything. Yeah, this was long before that happened.
So the live codes. It's my understanding that you, as the trustee, are the only one with the live codes. And recently, you went about proving that to various entities. How did that go? I bet there was a shock to some people.
Well, it's the first live code any of these people have seen in a long time.
Yeah.
I never really issued them publicly like that. This is the first time. I just figured, well, the system is the system. It's going to recognize what it's going to recognize, and if it was issued for an amount specific, that was all the code could be used for anyway. So they did confirm that the code was live. It attached to that account. I changed it 2 or 3 times, and each one of them came up live, and the other one came up defunct. So it's just, it's whatever we want to make it. We could make it Thomas if you want to.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make a difference as long as it's a proper usage of the system. And, there's checks and balances in place. So, I made that happen, where, we have, like I said, there's still many groups of quote unquote former slaves that exist on this planet. And we do have a respect for each other and a working effort between us. So
it's my understanding that the live codes were given to one particular group who then tried to hack it. And yet again, I know our members love this, it failed.
Well, the code was issued for an amount specific, for a party specific, to do a specific project. It was not issued for quad. It was issued for like $100 million project. So, it doesn't work that way anymore. I issued another one to another group for a environmental cleanup project. They tried to use that one at Citibank. I think you probably, if you're following the RV jargon, there was a talk about 2 months ago, month and a half ago, about Citibank is the new lead bank in the RV and all this. Well, there's a fund that exists at Citibank specifically meant for environmental cleanup. It's not meant to clean up the promises of some old people to another group. It's meant for an environmental cleanup. So, the second I emailed it out on purpose. I did it through a Google Mail, Gmail. I sent it out and on the 6th of January, if I recall. So, promptly within 24 hours, there were people at Citibank in Hong Kong trying to enter that code repeatedly, a bunch of old Chinese people. And that didn't work because it wasn't meant for that. And the system knows why I registered it.
Oh, well. That's the way the cookie crumbles.
Again, another benefit of an AI system. So
the AI, whilst we're on it, there's a lot of fear porn that was dubbed the psychotic AI that was loosened quite a lot, and my understanding is that particular system has now gone down, and this new system is programmed the right way and more beneficial and has a lot less capacity, has ultimate capacity, but a lot less capacity to interfere with humanity like it did in the past. Is that correct?
Well, that was the benefit of reprogramming it to be a trinary system, because before it was programmed by the former controller to perform these functions. Basically a full interception between nature and or natural law, and in all of us. So not only here, but many places, and it was reprogrammed to not, I mean, it's not doing that anymore. So all those other functions have been shut down once it actually had the full input of all the information that had been taken place. So it now recognizes what its former controller was actually doing and reversed out that process. That was done beginning of 2016. It took about 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. So you mentioned natural law. Given we have a maritime law, which is under the British law, British Accreditation Registry and Bar, what is the possibility of that system ending pretty soon and we return to common or natural law? Is that in the pipeline?
Well, think about what you said. You just mentioned Admiralty law, right?
Yeah.
Admiralty law is a byproduct of martial law.
Yeah.
So it was all registered under the same pretense under martial law. So are laws of the nation still going to exist? I'm sure they're going to, right? But as far as being behooven to a system, this is where, again, the sovereignty of the U.S. comes into play. The U.S. now makes its own laws. The people make the laws, right? The people vote on the laws. They're supposed to be written in 5th grade English. All of these things should come into play as everybody learns what they're supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah.
And this, yeah.
Well, we're getting close to the end now. We've been going 2 hours. And any update? I know you can't give countries out, but certain ones get threatened. But is the interest increasing of other countries declaring sovereignty?
Well, again, every nation's current system is structured differently.
Yeah.
So, we were having a lot of discussions about how to do that with a constitutional monarchy versus a democracy. But in any country that's a democracy, it's there's nothing that, it's who you're turning the keys over to, right? So I've kind of been doing it now under the pretense of, well, I'm not going to ask for permission anymore. Do you want this? I'm just going to say, here, I don't want this.
Yeah.
So, what they do with it from there is up to them, but, it's just going to be signed over now. So then there's nothing really getting in their way except for a bunch of people with a bunch of names that everybody recognizes.
Yeah. Good.
And it's, of course, a choice.
Yeah. So some people get kind of disappointed because there's a lot of people who put a lot of stuff out over the internet that they're the ones to do this and we've signed this off and we've signed that off. And some people obviously don't like the fact that it's all been delivered. There was been a lot of talk on the internet that this is done and that's done, and it just goes on and on and on. And suddenly somebody's come along and done it. And there's a kind of a skeptic nature, and people are uncomfortable with potential changes. What do you see as everyone's role in this going forward, and how they can push it forward, and how they can make the real changes?
Well, I can't. The old guard has a way of adding self-importance to individual people by giving them special titles that don't really exist.
Yeah. And,
anybody at any given moment in time could have done the same thing. The only difference is that, I happen to hold a position which any government anywhere can verify. It was verified as recent as this morning. So, I don't, nothing has changed. I know some people are saying that, she's going to lose her position and, there's going to be a new guy or a new lady or a new whatever. Well, that hasn't happened. And every government knows it.
Yeah.
Actionable items are important. And actionable items for the people are also important.
Yeah.
So now that you know what is going on, you have to govern yourself accordingly. Yeah. So it's to be sovereign as a person doesn't mean you don't have to have a driver's license anymore, or you're not a U.S. citizen or a citizen of any other nation. Your responsibility as a sovereign is to govern yourself and your own estate accordingly.
Yeah.
That means you now have responsibility for your own actions as you act towards others that are living in the same country and in other countries, and how you act in accordance with managing your own estate.
Yeah.
So, that responsibility is a huge responsibility that nobody has had that is still living to this day.
Yeah.
So, what you do with that is up to you. You have certain rights and certain privileges as a U.S. citizen or as a citizen of any other nation, and certain laws that you have to adhere to, until things change.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you have the ability to hold your own estate now. You have the ability to buy a piece of property. You're not chattel to anybody else. Do you have to pay taxes? Well, of course you have to pay taxes. It's just that how those taxes are used now, and you as a voter, hopefully will change soon. But these things are going to take time, and the understanding of what all this stuff means has only been privileged to a very few people, and none of them were dragons or their respective organizations or sub-organizations, So your connection to the Creator is your connection to the Creator. No one can stop you from doing that.
Yeah.
No one can stop you from receiving that information. Only you can stop you. Yeah. That control system is gone now. That interception into your free will is gone. I mean, does that mean you have the right to go walk up into the White House and demand meetings and whatnot? Well, I would say probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
But do you have the right to write to your president? Of course you do.
Yeah.
Or your congressman or your senator or whatever. That's what a republic is. A republic elects officials. And those officials are supposed to represent you. Now, maybe they'll have the capacity to do that from here on out.
And if they don't, we don't have to continue with the lesser of two evils. I've asked the people in the alternative media to step up, because there's a lot of people in the alternative community who have a vast amount of knowledge, far more than some of the people in the government. And they know the loopholes, and I'm hoping that the people who have decided to learn the truth about what's been going on then step into those roles and be the change, not repeat what they've done and play the ego role, I'm more important than you and all that nonsense. And I would love to see America implement no parties and just people doing the jobs for the benefit of the people going forward, because parties create division. It's something different when we all know now that they're both the same. There's some better ones in this.
Underneath the the dictator's law, right, which was martial law, you had to keep the world at war. If there was no war, then there would be no reason to continue martial law. It was a loophole.
Yeah.
So, that being said, divisions were created within divisions, within divisions, within divisions. And this has been going on since the days of Genghis Khan, Caesar, and even long before Jesus Christ ever came. So, there's a definitive mindset change that will also take place over time. Nothing is unwound in a day.
No.
Can you form your own groups within your own community to do your own community projects to benefit yourself and others? That is what being a sovereign is, right?
Yeah.
You are walking with your neighbor in peace.
Yeah.
So there's nothing stopping you from doing that. As long as you're doing all your proper things, you're registering your companies, doing whatever it is you need to do underneath the laws of the country, no one can stop you from building a bridge. No one can stop you from starting a shelter. No one can stop you from giving your neighbor $200 worth of food, all the way up to buying properties and granting them to the homeless. I mean, these are all things that are within your reach. No one can stop you from being a community leader.
Yeah.
And a leader is only a person that has people following them. That's what a definition of a leader is. I mean, of course, we have heads of state that go to these diplomatic meetings, and I don't think you want to be there anyway. Nothing gets accomplished. People have a meeting to talk about the meeting, to talk about the last meeting, to discuss the meeting before that, and then they all pat each other on the back and go away. I mean, nothing gets accomplished.
No.
Nothing changes. If you want to be the change, then be the change.
Yeah.
You have the access to the asset base. We're still fighting with the banks in the United States. I mean, if I get blocked by Dick Cheney one more time, I'm going to scream. But that's going to change very soon.
Yes.
And, the more people that take that as an opportunity to be that leader, to be that change, the faster this country and every other country is going to change. But the power is within you. And you do have to adhere to natural laws of sovereign,
Yep.
which means do no harm. Do no harm to the environment, do no harm to each other, do no harm to all the other walks of life that walk this planet.
Yeah.
Be responsible. It's all within you.
Absolutely.
It's not me, it's you.
Yeah. And this is things we've kind of done with the THI shows. We've blamed the Cabal for their role in it, but the people have allowed it far too easily, where as long as it doesn't disturb our own individual little bubbles, they can do what they like. Well, no, they can't. This is why we're in this mess, because we keep ignoring and we keep allowing them to dictate how life goes and who gets money and who doesn't get money and who gets food and who gets shelter and who doesn't. No, it's important that we step up and go, we're not tolerating this, we're not tolerating that. We'd like improvements in this, and we'd like some funds to go into here. The homeless off the streets, the veterans get healed properly and looked after, and we don't have the situation now where we've got 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 children in America, supposedly the richest country in the world, living below the poverty line. That has to stop, and we can't keep allowing or ignoring, well, it's not happening to me. Things that happen in California doesn't matter to me because I live in Iowa. Well, no, we're all important. And, if an Iraqi soldier dies, that's not important because he's not American. Well, yes, it is. Because all lives matter. And that is you taking your own personal responsibility, which we have dissolved our responsibility and handed it over to the courts, which doesn't serve justice. We've handed it over to the police, who don't serve justice previously. We've handed it over to governments who have expressed no interest in we the people, because they weren't allowed to. And so it's now your responsibility to step up into the role to be the change that you wish to see. It's not somebody else.
Sure.
It's not my role. It's not Kim's role. It's not Neil Keating's role, heaven forbid. You know, it's you. And this is where you've got to step forward.
You know, things like, for example, there's a big fight going on about minimum wage in McDonald's, and do you remember this? It was a few months back.
Yeah.
What's to stop you from starting your own organic food, fast food restaurant with real meat and real food, and paying the people $20, $30 an hour? There's nothing stopping you from doing that, especially if you're growing your own food with non-GMO products. Growing your own food with non-GMO products, your seeds are regenerating. Your cost of food goes down significantly, and you can still offer that $1 burger or that $1 salad or whatever it is, and pay people $20, $30 an hour, and still make money.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with doing that. Nobody's going to stop you.
You know, just not excessive amounts, which goes on waste. You know, buying fancy cars and fancy houses and all that. That's repeating the old ways. You know, we have to be more responsible. You know, and I think our group in particular has made giant strides where they've seen that they've been played a role in it, and that's important that people understand they've played a role in it as well. You can't just all blame the Cabal or the government. The governments, as you have said previously, all have been lied to, all have been threatened in one way, and they're kind of have been operating with their hands tied behind the back. Now, obviously, there are some elements in there that the hands are at the front, and they've been part of the ones threatening the other people. Well, now there's no excuses. You know, we need a change in Congress because those people are not serving the country. Either they are trained to serve the country, and certainly they shouldn't be going on for 20, 30, 40 years when they're operating in their 80s. How can they be modernising the country operating at 80 years of age? You know, they should have been retired. But these are the things that you, the public, have to step forward and say, we want to see this changed. And if we act responsible, then the need for government diminishes. If we keep handing our power over to government, they're going to keep controlling us because that's what we're asking for. So if we start governing ourselves in our own communities, why do we need government? Well, we don't. And it'll reduce itself as we become more personal responsibility.
Well, sure, their effect on your daily lives is going to change.
Yeah.
You know, and what 99% of the people in the world are concerned with is their family, their house, their neighbors, and their lives. And you know, do really any of these bills, other than certain ones that affect your right to bear arms and whatnot, I mean, but these things, you know, the majority of what they do, it doesn't really even affect you as a person.
No.
I mean, if you have enough resources, then you can make all those changes without asking anybody's permission. There'd be no reason to fight, for example, for higher minimum wage because nobody would be paying any attention to it anyway. Yeah. They've got a business model that works, you know, with paying higher wages, and nobody can stop you. Yeah. And then you have a whole bunch of new jobs created for people, and then you don't need food stamps anymore, and you don't need these other programs. But you know, that change has to come from all the people. It can't come from the government, and it's not going to come from the government. There is no new powers that be other than yourself. You have to accept that as a responsibility and embrace that change. There is no savior coming. You know, the Chinese elders are not your savior. These other folks that everybody's thinking are benevolent. There is no alien race coming to save you. You have to save yourself, and in turn your neighbor. And that has to come from us. It can't come from anybody else. It's how we got into this trouble in the first place.
Yep. We handed over our responsibility. And that has to start, right from the beginning with the global martial law onto the various methods of government and rule, kingdoms, and it's time the people took back their own responsibility and played the role. You can't, you're not going to get change doing the same thing over and over again, and it hasn't worked in the past. And like I opened THI with, you have to think and act different, and only then can you have the chance of seeing the change. If you're going to think and act the same way, the Cabal could step down at midnight tonight, all of them, walk away. What happens next? Now, you've heard me saying that on the show many times. What happens next? And most people say, party time. And then what happens next? And the silence. Well, no more silence, please. You've got to come up with ideas that's going to take the country forward and be the change. So obviously this is going to be, and this will be the final question, obviously it's going to be a major undertaking because there's changes that will have to be implemented, and it will take time here in America. But will there be a public announcement as such?
I don't know if anybody's going to stand up, head of state or otherwise, and just flat out tell you everything I'm telling you. Predominantly because only half of it has ever been explained to them anyway, or 10% of it. But I think you'll start seeing announcements being made relative to parts of the changes that we're discussing today.
Yeah.
So you might see, in the next coming months, you might see something like the cost of dollars, or more trade agreements, more bilateral trade agreements between nations. You might see taxes being further reduced. You might see companies moving back to the U.S. or new large companies. You might see things like a big pharma, like a Procter and Gamble, or some version thereof saying there's a cure for cancer, or there's we're not producing opioids anymore. We're doing natural pain medication, or based on some other CBD oil or THC or something to that effect on a mass scale. So you're going to see changes happening because these people are starting to get involved. You're going to see more arrests, more people stepping down. I would venture to guess you are. However that comes out in the news, and the real reason behind it, I think, would be, potentially be different. But I think you're going to see a lot more people stepping down, new people coming in. These are the changes that you're wanting. These are the changes that you're going to be seeing. But the changes in your community are going to be the most important changes. Once the banks here start figuring out what's going on, either by government decision because it's a matter of national security and there is no liquidity, or by them deciding that there is no liquidity and the bank wants to stay open, or new banks come.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, the changes in your community are going to be for the better, but because of you.
Yeah.
So public announcements, I think that you're going to start seeing it. I think you're seeing a lot of disclosure coming out about various things that you've been talking about, Thomas, for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's happening. It is happening. But it'll be done, I think, over time. I think you'll start picking up on a lot of these new things, and they will start benefiting you as a person, which are allowing you to do your change in your community. So I'm really excited for that. Like I said, I've met a lot of great people, wonderful people, since I've been talking to the RV community, who have a lot of fantastic projects that were just waiting for the funds to come. They don't have to wait for that anymore. And it's the same thing with THI. I love this group. I've been following you for a long time, and I like your group because everybody is very helpful to one another. everybody's, there's no judgment between one another. Everybody asks the information and the answers are given, and nobody's snapping at each other, at least not publicly in the forum, unlike some of the other communities. But, the most important thing is that there are, there'll always be bad people, right?
Yeah.
There'll always be a Dr. Evil somewhere that wants to do whatever he wants to do. And then there'll always be outright saintly people that have a great day every day, that would give their shirt off their back every day and walk like a saint, right? Or what our version of a saint is. And then everybody else is somewhere in between. We all have good days. We all have bad days. We all believe in things that maybe were not correct. And that ability to change and adapt with the times is very important. And you can help others that can't, that are having a difficult time.
Absolutely.
But, putting all your focus on defeating a group that's already been defeated is wasteful, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the next time Rothschild calls the U.S. military and they says, I order you to go seize this oil in this country, they can look at them and go, what's your name again? I'm sorry, who are you? Do you work here?
Exactly.
And that'll be a glorious day for all of us, I promise you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and we can play the Lily Allen songs at them. Yeah. Final words?
Well, thank you very much, Thomas, for having me. I appreciate it. I hope this helps all your members and anybody else listening understand the changes. If there's anything else you need from me or any other questions you have for me, just give me a call and we'll do this again.
Yes.
But again, I really appreciate all of you listening tonight, and I know it's late for some of you and super early for others that listen to the show. But I just wanted to thank all of you for participating in all the changes that are to come.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for all you've done. I'm sure in the future your name will go down in history. We've been through it together.
I hope not.
I know. You're like me, trying to shun the limelight, so to speak. But whilst others have talked, you've done, and this has been the difference. And it's important now, even the ones that have been against it, to stop it. The game's over, and let's all join together. It doesn't matter who it is. Even if you're an Irishman over in Bulgaria, you can't carry on playing the game. That's already lost. It's a bit like Anne, who lost the one-horse race election not so long ago. It's game over. And the military, I'm hoping, do the right thing and do it quickly. And we can get this country and all the other subsequent countries. In America, we're kind of better off than most. Sometimes we lose that perspective. There's people who don't have food, they don't have access to clean water, they don't have access to shelter, nothing. And obviously those countries have to be looked after immediately. And maybe that's something that the people who listen to this show would like to be involved in. Maybe you'd like to go to Africa and build homes and set up clean water plants and whatever. I know there's a number of members in CHI have got patents for this and patents for that. The funds will be there. Go and implement them, and you can all make the change. So I hope you've all enjoyed this show, and I hope you've got a better understanding of it now. And if there's any further announcements, we will do more of these shows. But remember, it's not a light switch event. There's often been talking about the event. This is a steady progress, and much progress has been done. You've heard the gist of it tonight, and we will get announcements. But just because it doesn't happen this week or maybe next week, you're already seeing the changes. And we keep asking and waiting for the mainstream media to announce this. These are the same people that have lied to us all our lives. Why are we waiting for them? Well, we're not. We can see the changes going on. We can see people being arrested. And yes, different crimes are being put out. It comes under fraud and corruption, but there's a whole heap more. I've warned you to this. And things are happening. And obviously, if we get over the bank hurdle, then other things will happen, and then you can get on with rebuilding this country. Not only this country, but every other country, because the same funds will apply to all the other countries. I know everyone says it's all about America. It's not. There's funds available for all 209 countries. And we can put this planet back the way it should have been. So, thanks for joining us. I'll be back again tomorrow. 3 shows in 3 nights. I know that pleases a lot of people. It doesn't please my partner. She doesn't get any Thomas time, but what should we end with? Shall we end with Lily? No, we're going to end with this one. This has been a Truth, Honour and Integrity show, and a special with Kim, known as Miss Manna. Thank you and good night, and the best is yet to come. Bye for now.